All right, so we're continuing on with The Light Princess by George MacDonald this week. And we just found out last week that the princess never smiled. That's where we left off. Chapter 7, The Metaphysics. After a long avoidance of the painful subject, the king and queen resolved to hold a council of three upon it, and so they sent for the princess. In she came, sliding and flitting and gliding from one piece of furniture to another, and put herself at last in an armchair in a sitting posture. Whether she could be said to sit, seeing she received no support from the chair whatsoever, I do not pretend to determine. "My dear child," said the king, "you must be aware by this time that you are not exactly like other people." "Oh, you dear funny papa, I have got a nose and two eyes and all the rest. So have you. So has mamma." "Now, be serious, my dear, for once," said the queen. "No, thank you, mamma. I'd rather not." "Would you not like to be able to walk like other people?" said the king. "No, indeed, I should think not. You only crawl. You are such slow coaches." "And how do you feel, my child?" the king resumed after a pause of discomfiture. "Quite well, thank you." "I mean, what do you feel like?" "Like nothing at all that I know of." "You must feel like something." "I feel like a princess with such a funny papa and such a dear pet of a queen, mamma." "Now, really," began the queen, but the princess interrupted her. "Oh, yes," she added, "I remember. I have a curious feeling. Sometimes I feel as if I were the only person in the world that had any sense." She had been trying to behave herself with dignity, but now she burst into a violent fit of laughter, threw herself backward over the chair, and went rolling about the floor in an ecstasy of enjoyment. The king picked her up more easily than one does a down quilt, and replaced her in her former relation to the chair. The exact preposition expressing this relation I do not happen to know. "Is there nothing you wish for?" resumed the king, who had learned by this time that it was useless to be angry with her. "Oh, you dear papa, yes," answered she. "What is it, my darling?" "I have been longing for it, oh, for such a time, ever since last night." "Tell me what it is." "Will you promise to let me have it?" The king was on the point of saying yes, but the wiser queen checked him with a single motion of her hand. "Tell me what it is first," said he. "No, no, promise first." "I dare not." "What is it?" "Mind, I hold you to your promise." "It is to be tied to the end of a string, and a very long string indeed, and be flown like a kite." "Oh, such fun! I would rain rose water, and house sugar plums, and snow whipped cream, and a fit of laughing checked her, and she would have been off again over the floor had not the king started up and caught her just in time. Seeing that nothing but talk could be got out of her, he rang the bell and sent her away with two of her ladies in waiting. "Now, queen," he said, turning to her majesty, "what is to be done?" "There is but one thing left," answered she. "Let us consult the College of Metaphysicians." "Bravo!" cried the king. "We will." Now at the head of this college there were two very wise philosophers by the name of Humdrum and Copykeck. For them the king sent, and straightway they came. In a long speech he communicated them what they knew very well already, as who did not, namely the peculiar condition of his daughter in relation to the globe on which she dwelt, and requested them to consult together as to what might be the cause and probable cure of her infirmity. Their consultation consisted chiefly in propounding and supporting for the 1,000th time each his favorite theories. For the condition of the princess afforded delightful scope for the discussion of every question arising from this division of thought. In fact, for a consideration of all of the metaphysics. But it is only justice to say that they did not altogether neglect the discussion of the practical question, what was to be done? Humdrum was a materialist, and Copykeck was a spiritualist. The former was slow and sententious, the latter was quick and flighty. The latter generally had the first word, and the former the last. "I reassert my former assertion," began Copykeck with a plunge. "There is not a fault in the princess, body or soul, only they are wrongly put together. Listen to me now, Humdrum, and I will tell you in brief what I think. Don't speak, don't answer me, I won't hear you until I have done. At that decisive moment when souls seek their appointed habitations, two eager souls met, struck, rebounded, lost their way, and arrived each at the wrong place. The soul of the princess was one of those, and she went far astray. She does not belong by any rights to this world at all, but to some other planet, probably Mercury. Her proclivity to her true sphere destroys all the natural influence which this orb would otherwise possess over her corporeal frame. She cares for nothing here. There is no relation between her and this world. She must, therefore, be taught by the sternest compulsion to take an interest in the earth as the earth. She must study every department of its history, its animal history, its vegetable history, its mineral history, its social history, its moral history, its political history, its scientific history, its literary history, its musical history, its artistical history, above all, its metaphysical history. She must begin with the Chinese dynasty and end with Japan. But first of all, she must study geology, and especially the history of the extinct races of animals, their natures, their habits, their loves, their hates, their revenges. She must— Hold, roared Humdrum. It is certainly my turn now. My rooted and insubvertible conviction is this, that the causes of the anomalies evident in the princess's condition are strictly and solely physical. But that is only tantamount to acknowledging that they exist. Hear my opinion. From some cause or another, of no importance to our inquiry, the motion of her heart has been reversed. I mean, in the case of the unfortunate princess, it draws in where it should force out, and forces out where it should draw in. The effects of the auricles and the ventricles are subverted. The blood is sent forth by the veins and returns by the arteries. Consequently, it is running wrong all the way through her corporeal organism, lungs and all. Is it then at all mysterious, seeing that such is the case, that on the other particular of gravitation as well she should differ from normal humanity? My proposal for the cure is this: phlebotomize until she is reduced to the last point of safety. Let it be effected, if necessary, in a warm bath. When she is reduced to a state of perfect asphyxy, apply a ligature to the left ankle, drawing it as tight as the bone will bear. Apply at the same moment to another of equal tension around the right wrist. By means of plates constructed for the purpose, place the other foot and hand under the receivers of the two air pumps. Exhaust the receivers, exhibit a pint of French brandy, and await the result, which would presently arrive in the form of grim death, said Kopekek. If it should, she would yet die in doing our duty, retorted Humdrum. But their majesties had too much tenderness for their volatile offspring to subject her to either of the schemes of the equally unscrupulous philosophers. Indeed, the most complete knowledge of the laws of nature would have been unserviceable in her case, for it was impossible to classify her. She was a fifth imponderable body, sharing all the other properties of the ponderable. Chapter 8. Try a drop of water. Perhaps the best thing for the princess would have been to fall in love. But how a princess who had no gravity could fall into anything is a difficulty, perhaps the difficulty. As for her own feelings on the subject, she did not even know that there was such a beehive of honey and stings to be fallen into. But now I come to mention another curious fact about her. The palace was built on the shores of the loveliest lake in the world, and the princess loved this lake more than her father or mother. The root of this preference, no doubt, although the princess did not recognize it as such, was that the moment she got into it, she recovered the natural right of which she had been so wickedly deprived, namely gravity. Whether this was owing to the fact that the water had been employed as the means of conveying the injury, I do not know, but it is certain that she could swim and dive like a duck that her old nurse said she was. The manner in which this alleviation of her misfortune was discovered was as follows. One summer evening, during the carnival of the country, she had been taken upon the lake by the king and queen in the royal barge. They were accompanied by many of the courtiers in a fleet of little boats. In the middle of the lake, she wanted to get into the Lord Chancellor's barge, for his daughter, who was a great favorite with her, was in it with her father. Now, though the old king rarely condescended to make light of his misfortune, yet happening on this occasion to be in a particularly good humor as the barges approached each other, he caught up the princess to throw her into the Chancellor's barge. He lost his balance, however, and dropping into the bottom of the barge, lost hold of his daughter. Not, however, before imparting to her the downward tendency of his own person, though in a somewhat different direction. For as the king fell into the boat, she fell into the water. With a burst of delighted laughter, she disappeared into the lake. A cry of horror ascended from the boats. They had never seen the princess go down before. Half the men were under water in a moment, but they had all, one after another, come up to the surface again for breath, when tinkle, tinkle, babble, and gush came the princess's laugh over the water from far away. There she was, swimming like a swan, nor would she come out for king or queen, chancellor or daughter. She was perfectly obstinate. But at the same time, she seemed more sedate than usual. Perhaps that was because a great pleasure spoils laughing. At all events, after this, the passion of her life was to get into the water, and she was always the better behaved and the more beautiful the more she had of it. Summer and winter it was quite the same, only she could not stay so long in the water when they had to break the ice to let her in. Any day, from morning to evening in the summer, she might be seen, a streak of white in the blue water, lying as still as the shadow of a cloud, or shooting along like a dolphin, disappearing and coming up again far off just where one did not expect her. She would have been in the lake at night, too, if she could have had her way, for the balcony of her window overhung a deep pool in it. The wide, wet water, and through a shallow, reedy passage she could have swum out into the wide, wet water, and no one would have been any wiser. Indeed, when she happened to wake in the moonlight, she could hardly resist the temptation. But there was the sad difficulty of getting into it. She had as great a dread of the air as some children have of the water, for the slightest gust of wind would blow her away, and a gust might arise in the stillest moment. And if she gave herself a push toward the water, and just failed of reaching it, her situation would be dreadfully awkward, irrespective of the wind. For at best she would have to remain suspended in her nightgown till she was seen and angled for by somebody from the window. "Oh, if I had my gravity," thought she, contemplating the water, "I would flash off this balcony like a long white seabird headlong into the darling wetness." This was the only consideration that made her wish to be like other people. Another reason for her being fond of the water was that in it alone she enjoyed any freedom, for she could not walk alone without a party, consisting in part of a troop of light horse, for fear of the liberties which the wind might take with her. And the king grew more apprehensive with increasing years, till at last he would not allow her to walk abroad at all without some 20 silken cords fastened to as many parts of her dress, and held by 20 noblemen. Of course, horseback was completely out of the question, but she bade good-bye to all this ceremony when she got into the water. And so remarkable were its effects upon her, especially in restoring her for the time to ordinary human gravity, that Humdrum and Kopekek agreed in recommending the king bury her alive for 3 years. They hoped that, as the water did her so much good, the earth would do her yet more. But the king had some vulgar prejudice against this experiment, and would not give his consent. Foiled in this, they yet agreed to another recommendation, which was very remarkable indeed. They argued that, if water of external origin and application could be so efficacious, water from a deeper source might work a perfect cure. In short, that if the poor afflicted princess could by any means be made to cry, she might recover her lost gravity. But how was this to be brought about? Therein lay all the difficulty, to meet which the philosophers were not wise enough. To make the princess cry was as impossible as to make her way. They sent for a professional beggar, commanded him to prepare his most touching oracle of woe, helped him out of the court charade box to whatever he wanted for dressing up, and promised great rewards in the event of his success. But it was all in vain. She listened to the mendicant artist's story, and gazed at his marvelous makeup, till she could no longer contain herself, and went into the most undignified contortions for relief, shrieking, yes, positively screeching with laughter. When she had a little recovered herself, she ordered her attendants to drive him away, and could not give him a single copper, whereupon his look of mortified discomfiture wrought her punishment and his revenge, for it sent her into violent hysterics, from which she was with difficulty restored. But so anxious was the king that the suggestion should have a fair trial, that he put himself in a rage one day, and rushing up to her room, gave her an awful whipping. Yet not a tear would flow. She looked grave, and her laughing sounded uncommonly like screaming. That was all. The good old tyrant, though he put on his best gold spectacles to look, could not discover the smallest cloud in the serene blue of her eyes. and we'll continue on next week.